Back again with another video, welcome back to the channel. A whiff of a waffle cone by imaginary authors. So this is a very, very fun, gourmand. And I sprayed it earlier, right? Bottle is lovely, honestly. You only get 50 ml, but to be honest, for this kind of juice, you will use it wisely, honestly, because it's strong. Vanilla, salted caramel, Saigon cinnamon, heavy cream, interesting. Sandalwood, orgeat, scoop shop. So let me describe this scent, right? Because it's a tough scent to describe, if you haven't smelled it before. So imagine, you're having ice cream, and you got waffle, you've got that creaminess, a waffle cone with like vanilla added on top, but like maybe some, I don't want to say syrup because I don't really smell syrup in there, but it's more like a light drizzle of syrup, but it's the sweetness is definitely in there, and you get a lot of sweetness in there. It's not like a sugary sweetness, it's more of a, creamy sweetness, if that makes sense. So that's what I get. And, it does mention salted caramel. I kind of get hints of that. But the one I do notice a lot towards the dry down is the, because I sprayed my skin earlier, is the sandalwood. It does come across. Yeah, the sandalwood, and the cream. So it's one of those ones, it's a very, very fun fragrance, very unique, projects very strong for the first hour or two. This is very strong. So if you're going to spray this, please spray it away from you because it is very strong, Not for everyone. It is one of those ones where, you've got to really love your gourmands because this is very unique, very different, out of the box, unorthodox gourmand. Because when you think gourmands, people think of like Bianca Latte, these kind of, overhyped fragrance, which I don't like myself. This is very unique, Is it a collector's item? I think if you're collecting, yes, 100%, Having said that, it's not the most versatile. So if you want versatility, this is not your kind of scent, because it's a very, childish scent. When I say childish, it just reminds me of rolling back the years, I've said it in my TikTok videos, it's like, it's more of a, it reminds me of, honestly, when I'm going to have a family breakfast downstairs, a Holiday Inn or like a holiday, Americans say vacation, you're having vacation or with your family and having, some waffles, vanilla syrup on top, that kind of, idea of it, this is what it reminds me of my childhood, honestly. And yeah, it's so, special to me because not many scents. Sorry, I'm gonna get emotional here. Sorry. Yeah, no, sorry, getting emotional here. Not many scents bring back my childhood, and I think for that reason, this is a lovely scent. Sorry, I'm getting emotional. It honestly means a lot to me right now. Is when I think of this fragrance, it's just sentimental for the right reasons. It's not reminding me of a dark place in my childhood. It reminds me of, sorry guys. It honestly reminds me of, really, sorry, I'm getting emotional here. It reminds me of, you want to have your childhood back, but through a bottle. I think, God, sorry guys, I'm so sorry. That's what it reminds me of. This scent is one of those scents where it reminds me of the sweetness of life. And I think that's what, I don't know if that's the angle that, Josh Mayer was going for, the founder behind Imaginary Authors. It's an indie brand, if I haven't told you by now. I think it reminds me of my childhood and the sweetness of life. I think, life is short. As I always told you guys, you're just going to enjoy it, especially the collecting. Just buy what you want, life is so short. And, if you want like something gourmand, playful, it gives you, rolls back the years a lot. This reminds me of, I'm 31. This reminds me of when I was like maybe, in my, not teen years, but just going to a dessert shop, just forgetting about life, and just enjoying the sugary overload, of a dessert in a bowl, that what it reminds me of, I know it says with a waffle cone. It does give me the waffle cone, but it also reminds me of a coffee shop, believe it or not, with the actual, vanilla and the syrupiness to it. Not overly syrupy, it's just slight sugar in there, but it's just got a bit of everything, It is powerful. It does, have longevity in there. It is not for everyone. You know, this is something very unique. You know, you have to have that uniqueness in your, you know, taste to go for something like this, because it's a gourmand, but it's a very, you know, unique gourmand. So, and they've done a great job. You know, shout out to Imaginary Authors. You know, you've done an immaculate and amazing, outstanding job with this flipping fragrance. So good, you know, and opens up like a book. You know, this is how, you know, it reminds you of literally reading a book, because I used to be a bit of a bookworm when I was growing up. So it reminds you of, you know, just forget about all my problems and just sitting down to read a book, you know, and it's just so special. You know, such a special fragrance to me. A great fragrance, honestly. You smell lovely, delicious. You know, you smell very yummy, edible. The person who's going, no, obviously don't eat someone. Just saying, it's just a gourmand. But it does remind me of there is hope in life, and I think it's just one of those fragrances. It will always hold a special place in my heart. You know, no matter where I go, you know, it's something where I can just always spray and have to not worry about too much about life. You know. But obviously, the downside to this fragrance, like I said before, if I haven't mentioned by now, it is not the most versatile. You don't want to spray this everywhere. You know, it's definitely more suited towards the autumn and winter. You know, I think maybe in the evenings you could get away with it. It's very, very, you know, limited versatility. So I think that's where it kind of, you know, loses marks overall. You know, price point is around 85 to 90 pounds. So you look at just under the $100 mark. Very good value for money. For what you're getting, are there better gourmands out there? 100% there are better gourmands out in the market, but this is not about that. I'm not comparing it to anything. I'm comparing it to itself. You know, just by itself, on its own merit, it's a great fragrance, you know, very fun. And, you know, it's an indie brand. So, you know, you are supporting a brand that's not as big as the other commercial corporate, you know, perfumery houses, you know, who have much more, you know, budgets to work with, you know, more mass appealing, you know, heavily advertised, pushed down to the market. You are supporting a niche indie house. So for the record, if you don't know what indie means, it's independent, but you know, it's a very, you know, the true gourmand lovers will appreciate the artistry, you know, and trying something different with this particular, you know, out of the box gourmand, you know, this creation. And I think this is what I mean when I say perfume is an art. You know, you're not buying it just for the smell. You're buying it because it's an artistic creation, you know. It's inspired by, I think it's a hot waffle on a summer's day or something like that, you know. But it's one of the best fragrances I've ever come across, you know. And it just does, it's got its love, but it doesn't get enough love in my eyes, you know. It needs more love, you know. But yeah, that's my take on it. I'll see you next one, guys.